this year. I'm in the English department, but part of my job is to work with OIT and sort of interface with the faculty, give them faculty viewpoints on things, but also help organize this community practice. And I've seen some familiar faces here, so you know that's good. But these are the chances for people, you know, different faculty members, staff, you know, students if they ever want to show up, I guess. But to get together and talk about teaching and technology and what's going on, some, you know, say developments and things that are currently happening. You may have seen the large posters sitting around the library in the hallways with the thermometers on them, you know, that's not measuring, you know, like anger against Butch Jones or anything like that. What they're actually measuring is the amount of money that open access textbooks have saved students here on campus. And open access is textbooks, but it's also a lot of other things. So we're fortunate as a developing kind of area to have some people here at the library and in the geography department who have been working with it to talk to us today a little bit about what's involved, how it works, some of the ins and outs, and what have yous of that. So let me start around the sign-in sheet. So if you put your name and email on that as it goes around so we can kind of track that. And let me just introduce Rachel Caldwell, who is in the Scholars Collaborative here at the library. If you don't know about the Scholars Collaborative, Google it. It's awesome. But I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about the whole kind of the infrastructure a little bit here. Sure. And then Adam Alsamadisi, who's in the Geography Department. We teach Geography 101, I remember. Who's going to talk a little bit about his experiences using open access material. So.
Great. Thank you, Rob. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be working mostly from websites as opposed to PowerPoint slides, so I'll be going through these a little bit here. How many people here are in instructional design? How many people here are teaching a class? Excellent, okay. That's great, that helps me kind of figure out who's in the room. So I'm going to start here with this Open Ed portal that we have available from the library's website. There's a lot going on here, but what I want to bring our attention to most is what this is. A lot of people aren't sure what open and what in particular an open educational resource or an open textbook is. So this is from UNESCO, and open educational resources are any type of educational materials that are introduced with an open license or in the public domain. Okay? The nature of these materials means that anyone can legally and freely copy, use, adapt, reshare. There's no price involved in that sharing or reuse. You don't need to buy a material in order to use it and use it legally. Right? OERs include textbooks, but also curricula, syllabi, lecture notes, assignments, tests, projects, audio, anything that's an instructional material is really an educational resource. And the thing that makes it open is that it's no cost, it's free to share, it's usually free to adapt, right? And you can do that legally, not skirting around the law, but there is a license on there that says this is available for you to use, all right? All right, so a couple of examples of what these are. Within our site, Canvas, within our course management system, Canvas, there is a connection to this site, the OER Commons. Has anybody heard of the OER Commons? It is a large collection of openly licensed educational materials, right? And the OER Commons includes things for K through 12 instructors, community college instructors, all the way up to institutions of higher education. And often the materials in here, they might be listed or identified or created by a particular instructor. They may also be from an organization or from, say, a federal agency or from a nonprofit organization that's working within a university, right? So we get lots of different creators. And in the OER Commons, you'll find things like videos, tutorials, lectures, sometimes worksheets and activities. So a wide range of things. Right. This is only one place to find OER materials, but it's an increasingly popular one, and it's one that's frequently used. You can see the audiences here on the site for K through 12, for higher ed. It's a very simple to use interface here to search for them. Now, what we're talking about in particular today is one small subset of OER, and that's open textbooks. Okay? And here is one example of a large open textbook publisher. This is Rice University, and they have a nonprofit publishing arm that's called OpenStax. Right? Many, many materials here in a wide range of subjects. And what OpenStax from Rice University has done in particular is focused on the high enrollment, lower division courses. The ones where an instructor might be teaching 300 to 800 students, lots and lots of students, okay? And the information is pretty foundational. You don't need a lot of expertise. And so the reason I think they're focusing on that population and on those particular courses is that it can have a huge impact on students and saving them money, right? Especially not in courses where they're going to, in their discipline, have to keep going back to that, right? Once you get some of these basics, you probably don't need to keep coming back to your textbook. But when you get into your specialty areas, you do want to hold on to some of those textbooks, right? And you do want to go back and that might be more of a place where the textbook market makes a little bit more sense for some audiences and publishers. So anyway, they're focusing on these lower division courses, and it's not just math, as you see here. A is algebra, so that's why we're here. But you can see we've got instructors on campus who are using the concepts of microbiology right now in a Biology 150. We're using, for several years, people in physics have been using college physics for Physics 221 and 222. And we're also now, just this year, we've discovered that our psychology department in their Intro to Psych classes is using this Intro to Psych textbook here. So when I mention psychology, it's not just one course, it's actually around, somewhere around 2,500 students. And how we usually calculate savings is about $100 per student. That takes into account some of the things you could buy used, some of the things that if you bought brand new would be over $200 to $300. So a sort of safe estimate is somewhere around $100. So $100 times 2,500 students is significant savings for students, right? All right. So who beyond UT is interested in open textbooks? There is an organization called the Open Textbook Network. It's part of the University of Minnesota's Center for Open Education. And they've really focused particularly on textbooks. And these are some of their members. Okay, so I want to give you an idea of who else is involved in this movement and using and adopting open textbooks. So I'm just going to scroll down so you can see some of these names. And there we are at Tennessee. Okay. So hopefully people see some of these are maybe some aspirational institutions. Some of them might be some peer institutions. There's a lot of institutions here who are deciding that this is kind of something that we want to look into and put some effort and energy into. Now, something about these open textbooks is that they are not meant to say you have to use an open textbook. That's not saying that this is the best option for you. It's saying that this is another option for finding course materials, and one that you might not see because it doesn't get quite as much attention, right? So for example, when you're going to Amazon or when you're using some of the proprietary publishers' tools, they're not going to direct you here. So my role and the library's role, I think, is to increase awareness. That's really what we're trying to do. We don't know that there's always going to be, in fact, we know not every course has a useful open textbook. It hasn't been created, or maybe the one that wasn't all that great. Just like regular textbooks, there's a lot of variation within open textbook. It very much depends on the author, right, and on the materials. So I'm not saying that this is the solution for everyone, but I am saying this is something to be aware of and to add to your toolbox and to talk to other people about to see if this is a possibility. And our next speaker, Adam, will tell us a little bit about how that happened in the geography department here at UT. Before I go on, just very quickly, people often wonder, well, how does it work? Right? Most textbooks, there's a fee that the publisher has, and then there's some extra for the profit, and that's how it works. This is how the system works. Well, many of the open textbooks that we see created have perhaps some institutional funding behind them, but also a lot of grant funding. And one of the biggest ones is the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So these are organizations that think that access to education is important. Access to educational materials is important. And more importantly than that, even equal access to educational materials is important. So often what happens is a faculty member has an opportunity to receive a grant and use that grant as some time release, right? Some time away to write or publish an open textbook. The guarantee is that there's a stipend that the faculty member gets that sort of covers probably more than what they'd usually get when their typical textbook goes out, because most people who publish a textbook, most authors, don't get a huge cut of that back to them. There are exceptions, but for the most part, most authors really don't see anything back from that. So this stipend that they get from a grant is usually quite significant and helpful. It makes the effort worth it. And one of the stipulations of the grant is you're going to license it openly, because that's what the foundation wants. Okay? And then what that means is that this organization spends maybe $3,000 plus some support and other things like that. But then we get a textbook that anyone can use at a community college, at this university, at a university or school outside of the country. Right? It's open and it's out there and it's available for everyone. Okay. A couple of other things that I think are important to look into is what this means in terms of student success. So at BYU, they have a research group that's devoted to open education, not just open textbooks, but open education. And they're called the Open Education Group, as you can see here. They've got their own website. And it's a number of faculty members, and you can do some research here. You'll also see, of course, some of the supporters, as I mentioned, the Hewlett Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and some others, right? But what I'd like to point you to is some of their publications, the research that they've done. And one of these in particular from 2015 I want to point you to. If you're interested in learning about this effect on teaching and on student success, let's look at the one with Wiley right here. The Fisher, Hilton, Robin, Wiley 2015 article, a multi-institutional study of the impact of open textbook adoption on the learning outcomes of post-secondary students. Okay? The main gist of this study that are supported in other ways by some smaller population studies. This is a quite large study. It's done over many institutions. Says that students in a course that uses open textbooks and other open educational materials, but mostly open textbooks, this one right here, just open textbook adoption, perform as well or better than students in a course that is similar and uses subscription or purchased materials. Okay? The theory behind this being that it might not be a huge difference in terms of, we might have instructors teaching the same things. It might be textbooks that are very similar. The difference is access. All students get access to the material. Okay? Now I say the word access, and then that gets into a lot of words that other people get thrown in with that, right? So we've got open access, we've got open textbooks, we've got inclusive access, which is a publisher's term, okay? And I just want to mention very quickly, back on our Open Ed resources guide here, this under On Campus, we have a link to compare options and textbook models, okay? So really quickly, let me just show you that. These are the basic ways that we know people might decide to build their course readings and or make their reading materials available. I need to wrap this up soon, and I will. Physical textbooks are what we're all most familiar with. Right? Inclusive access is a publisher's version of this, where students sort of rent a textbook for a semester, and the rental might be about $50, right around there. Okay? After that, they lose access. Right? And that $50 also does not typically include any of the other materials that an instructor might add in, like online homework, access codes. If you hear the access codes, that's something different. Okay? This is just strictly the textbooks that we're looking at. So they lose access to the textbooks after that, but they do get access the first day of class. In many upper division classes, it's not about textbooks, it's about journal articles. right? And so a lot of times what we have here are from our library subscriptions. But you might be surprised, we might even have subscription to the book that you're looking into. If it's an ebook, we might have it. And that might be something where we've licensed it for multi-user use. So you might look first at the library OneSearch just to see if we might have a textbook already available to you, or maybe a chapter that you want to use to supplement and not students have to buy it. And then we've got these open textbooks, which are also available first day of class. Students don't pay for it, and they get access no matter what. So if it's 2 years later and they want to go back to it, they haven't lost access. It's because it's openly licensed and available. So we have down here how these differ, right? What the costs are, what the time is for faculty to, for example, it's significant if you're using the library collections because you have to pick and choose maybe to build your readings. Whereas if you have some of these other textbooks built for you already, it's quite easy. But that's something I want to bring your attention to. It is open textbooks I would consider open access textbooks. But there is a distinction and a huge distinction between inclusive access and open access, all right? The other thing to keep in mind with inclusive access is that students have to opt out. They are automatically added, their books are added to their bursar bill. And so that might not be something they're aware of. It might not be something that they know they could exercise as that choice. It is a much smaller amount than a new cover, a new copy. But that is something to keep in mind when you're assigning these. Okay. Finally, where to find these. So also on our Open Ed guide, we have Find Open Textbooks. And what that takes you to is the Open Textbook Network's Open Textbook Library. What the Open Textbook Library has done is they don't host any of this textbooks. They've just sort of compiled places to find lots of open textbooks. So all of the Rice University OpenStax titles are listed in this library. So are the SUNY collections and the University of British Columbia. Those are some of our big open textbook publishers. They're all listed here, and you can browse by subject here. And for example, let's go into one that we know people have used. Let's just go into natural sciences. We'll jump to Anatomy and Physiology has 29 reviews from people who are instructors or faculty, 4.5 stars. This one hasn't gotten any reviews yet, up at the top in Analytical Chemistry. You'll see a wide range here. Some of these only get 2 to 3 stars. Most, I would say, average between 3.5 and 4.5. But you'll get to read what people are saying about the titles, and that can be useful when you're choosing them. And then when you go into one, you will see the ways you can access it. You get the chapters, you get a link to the reviews, and this important piece here, which is how do you use it? You're free to use it as long as you say who the author is, and you link back to the version that the author has used. You can edit it, but again, you want to always provide a link back to the original textbook that this author created. So you can say this is a modification of, but the original can be found here. Okay? And then here we've got the contributors and authors listed here. So I like the Open Textbook Library. It's not comprehensive, it doesn't have everything, but it does have a really good sampling of many, many open textbook publishers. And then finally on our guide, I just want to mention that we do have a running list of people who have adopted open textbooks at UT. We've got biology, engineering fundamentals, physics, a couple of grad classes actually. Ed Psych and counseling, but then we've also got general psychology and a few others. And if you know of anyone who's adopted one, please click here so we can get you registered and we can know and report how much students are saving on this. And I'll just finally close with those signs outside in the library are an effort of the Provost's Office, the library, SGA, and the Teaching and Learning Center. And that's because we really, all groups, feel that this is very important for faculty to consider when we're talking about access to educational materials, student success, and really understanding what our population here is in East Tennessee, where there are a lot of first-generation students and a lot of students also just really struggling because their families don't have the income that we see in other parts of the country. So again, not an answer to everything, but an important thing to consider. I'm going to hand it over to Adam.
I'm not used to this limelight, so please forgive me. Let's Okay, so don't have any slides or anything, but I thought I would talk kind of generally of our experience. Is this situation working? I can only assume yes. So if you guys have any specific questions, please don't hold back. I'm happy to answer them in that format. I was thinking about the things that Rachel said. I think the first thing that stood out was the idea that in upper division classes, the reliance is more on journal articles than a textbook. And I think that's a really important point because we're trying to prepare students to get used to the formats of 300 and 400 level classes. And I don't know exactly when their transition stops, but I think that the textbook can sometimes be used a little more like a sometimes secondary institution than how we might expect education to go at the college level. For me, a textbook is about like the beat, and the professor provides, or the teacher and instructor provides the melody, right? And sometimes, especially I think was the case maybe with our textbooks, was that the textbook became the class. And all the textbooks come with their this and that, and the videos, and the pages. I mean, they don't, some textbooks have like 10 columns of text, and don't forget about this little blurbs. And that just was not necessarily my gig. And that's hard because a geography class has a pretty tall order, right? I mean, I know anatomy and physiology does too, and so does biology, but I mean, we're talking about the whole world, right, in geography. So there's a lot of material, and I think that was kind of our biggest, kind of our observation was that we were getting lost in the textbook, having so much. So we switched to, I brought it up, this open textbook. And I was there for the decision-making part of when we were picking our new textbook. And we had maybe 10 different, I had no idea how lucrative the textbook market was, but definitely something to look into. But we had about 10 different geography books that we were kind of trying to decide, and it was mixed. The class is usually taught by grad teaching associates, but every now and then we have a faculty member who takes on the class. So the conversation was maybe half faculty members and half grad students. The first thing that the faculty point out, they said, wow, look at how long that textbook is. It is 856 pages. That is way longer than your average textbook. But look at the page format. Like I mentioned, we're talking one column of text here. Maybe it doesn't have all the doodahs that some of the Wiley textbooks might have, but it's got the beat, right? And so I have the availability to provide the melody. And the way I use the textbook, I use the text in my presentations. I point to where the students can find different concepts within the book. I love the different the photos that they have and then the figures that they have. But I also am able to supplement it with material that I like personally more than just the textbook. Like, I use a lot of Canvas Canvas is awesome. I'm sure many of you have engaged with it. I hope that many others are feeling that it's awesome. But I use a lot of like podcasts, especially for geography videos. And I'm free from the ones that were required in the textbook that not only did I maybe not like as much as some that I prefer and fit my own kind of teaching context, but also geography, you have to stay on top of things, right? The world is changing for better, for worse every minute, right? So I really was able to kind of use those different resources that were cream of the cusp. One of my students came up to me last week and was like, I don't know if it's because my phone's listening in, but I'm always getting these news updates about things that we're actually talking about in class. And I'm like, no, it's because I'm trying to stay on top. I'm trying to watch the news and stay on top of things. I'm trying to get you guys the information that you need today, right? The other thing that was talked about was kind of the financial burden. And I mean, I think it happens in more classes than we probably know that a student will say, I spent $150 or more on this book. and we used it twice, you know? And definitely in the context of the area, that's burdensome to the student. It's tough to push education sometimes in the first place, and then you add all these things. So I am happy that the first thought the student has when they're enrolling in the class is, oh my gosh, that's over $150 for the textbook. I better like this class and I better use this textbook. So that burden is off from me, right? And additionally, and this happened in that conversation with the faculty, I don't think we sacrificed anything really. I think we really gained a lot from this textbook. First, it's a book that the students can read and focus on and look at one paragraph, one at a time, and get the information they need. And so I don't want to phrase, definitely I feel the conversation of, oh, you get what you pay for, we're not paying for anything for this. I think that's moot. I think we get a lot from this textbook. And from my review, I'm a grad student, and I haven't bought textbooks in a while. A lot of the work, I used a lot of journal articles, but I definitely use different ebooks, especially in like coding and kind of computational stuff. That's been available for a long time. So for me, we had some faculty members who said, wait a second, I really like the lectures that they give. I get that. I really like the assignment ideas that they provide. I get that. But I think this also comes with its own set of unique benefits that I've really appreciated for my course. Sorry if that was here, there, and everywhere. Are there any questions I can try to address? I think the faculty was kind of, it was a hard push. It was a hard push. And several of them were unsure. But after using the textbook for now 3 semesters, definitely all of us teaching the course appreciate what the textbook has brought to us.
Have you each done your own presentations, or is there consistency across who's teaching it and what you've tried to?
Yeah, sure. So we all teach the world, right? But some of us do share slides and share information and share lists of like podcasts or videos. But I think we all take a pretty different approach in teaching our sections. That's kind of the nature of geography, right? Some folks are more interested in historical geography. I'm more interested in like environmental and human-environment interactions. So we all take our own. But that's why I kind of like this, right? Because I don't want to use the word bare bones, because it's not bare bones. It's pretty comprehensive. I mean, 856 pages of good material. But it allows me to have my own aspect of the class in there. I think people would enjoy teaching if they had a little bit more of that.
Do similar mid-assessments, and is that based on or informed by your book?
So some of us have different kind of testing schedules, but one thing that I know we like to do is say, is this test question in the book? Is it kind of an easy thing to take from the book? Can that wind up on a PowerPoint slide? Sure. And I mean, definitely you can just you could just drag different parts and make your own PowerPoint. So I think the content is borrowed for our exams, yeah. And I think the students like that because it's way easier. I mean, Control F, I guess most folks know that's like find something within the book, compared to, let me check the index. I mean, I love books, don't let me, I'm not trying to, destroy the medium here. But, I think it's helpful for students, especially, I don't want to use the gen ed argument, but I think we get a lot of students in geography. This is a gen ed. I want to make this a great gen ed for them. I don't want this to be, I have to knock it out, as they say when they come for their advising appointment, like it's a bowling pin. But, I want this to be an enjoyable experience, and I think that access and that ease contributes a lot to that.
Can you tell us a little bit about the decision process and, finding one that you all were comfortable with, and, was the authority of the authors, consideration? How did you make that decision?
Yeah, I don't think we did enough not necessarily enough. I don't think we did a lot of focus on this like epistemological aspects. I think a lot of the focus was on price, right? And I think we may have minimized how much the open textbook brought to us in our discussion. I think the biggest concern were folks saying, well, we get these PowerPoint slides when we buy the textbook, and that's really convenient. And that's a tough one to go against, right? But I think the argument's also, well, sometimes that PowerPoint slide doesn't really focus on what I feel is important or what I'm really going to talk about. So that was definitely part of the conversation. Yeah, and kind of the benefits of having a textbook and that whole system. I mean, I don't want to diminish them, like I said, and I think that was a big part of that conversation as well. We had about, I think, 10 textbooks, and there were multiple ebooks that we had thought about at the time. This one was chosen. I think there were a couple recommendations that chose it, but I remember liking it because I guess I'm right on the page that they did integrate some like physical geography in there, and that's something I like. And I mean, I would be very frustrated personally if the textbook that we chose did not integrate those kind of environmental aspects. Yeah, I hope I kind of answered your question there.
This is a question maybe for all three of you all. So I'm in English and on the composition committee. This semester we're revising the textbook that ITCoP published, and the publishers were pushing for us to do a digital-only access. So right now we're working on a survey for students to try to determine whether, I think we're probably going to end up having both, and this is not an open source textbook, I was just thinking about the digital component. And so we're working on a survey for students to determine whether digital-only will in fact mean that they all have access. So it's like a different access question, it's the tech access question, and so is the assumption here, when you referenced that study, Rachel, about improved performance with an open source textbook, like is the assumption that the students just all have tech and we should just assume that, or is it that they're using the library tech or other computer labs when they're reading? Like what does it mean if they don't live on campus and they might not have laptops, or is that like an outdated worry?
I don't think it's an outdated worry because there's a clear preference for students to have print, actually.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people really like having, I don't know if most, but I will say that there are a lot of people that still like to have the physical copy. So what in cases of these textbooks, right, I don't know that a student would want to print out 160 pages, and so that would be a challenge. Most of these textbooks, though, the bookstore will, for example, I'm not sure with geography, I know definitely with psychology, they order a small number of print books that come bound from a bindery, and they charge a very low amount. It's about $40 to $50. And it depends on how many pages, of course. And so that option is still there. And it's partly because of that open license that says, you know, you can use this however you want to, as long as you say, don't make a profit if it's a non-commercial license, right? So you don't. So you might be able to cover overhead and the resources needed to print it, which is roughly $40 to $50 for a large book. And then you get the students to get it at the bookstore. So I don't know what it is with that particular publisher. Bless you. But I would say that students are still using it in different formats. Adam, do you have it?
That's a tough one. Yeah, different aspect of access. But the one thing I am thinking is that I do have some students who use their phone for the podcast, for the videos, and for the book. And so, I mean, obviously that's still an access question. And I don't think, it would be feasible, even especially if access is a concern, to print out 1,000 pages. I'm, I think, really grateful for the tech services that the library has, is how I can answer that question, I guess. Yeah.
So many students use Canvas, and instructors use it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm not as careful about it as I used to be in class, because I used to be careful about laptop, like bring your laptops, whatever, but they just always had them, and so I tend to make this much.
Right.
Well, I have one question. We have a textbook that my class uses, and word problem or not with ebooks, but I've had students tell me that when they get the ebook version of it, there are lots of tables in it that are horizontal format, and they say that in the ebook version they cannot read them. And I don't know whether that's because this is one is the publisher, you would think,
They
you
would
know.
have that figured out.
Yeah. So I didn't know whether, and that made me think, you know, access, you know, okay, so the student thinks, oh, I've got a choice, I can get the hardback or I can get the, and so now I warn my students, I say, I have heard, I don't know this for a fact because I haven't seen it myself, but I've heard people say that the tables are unreadable, so.
I don't know.
Have you heard?
I
I don't know, I need to really look into it further
Because it could be just that they've either magnified or they haven't scaled or they've blown something up. There could be a lot of different things. The other thing is how they build things. So if it's built specific for an iPad and maybe it's built for a specific generation, you might have different things. So you might want to actually write the publisher and ask.
Yeah, I haven't had that. Here's a
Here's
a table. But yeah, and we use a lot of graphics, a lot of maps, obviously, and we've never had
And
that
in this
specific.
book, when you get to a page that's the opposite orientation, does it flip?
No, it just scrolls down straight.
But they formatted it so it's not.
Yeah.
It's not an issue, so they put it vertical table instead, okay.
Well, this you can easily magnify, which some of the ebooks on Canvas, like our hard race handbook, you can't magnify it. So it's really small window. It's not really that user friendly, but with this, you could easily.
It's just a PDF.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
PDF. Yeah.
I believe that the EPUB is the format that's supposed to be
Yeah.
good for all ebook readers.
Yeah.
And a lot of books from these publishers, the open textbook publishers, have a EPUB format. And so that takes care of some of those concerns. But not all books are available in all formats. You know, it's just like any other collection. Depends.
I've got just two general comments. One, a thought of, for those who are adopting the open education resources, could there be like an indicator in the UT course catalog? You already on that, or?
I'm not on it, but I think that would be great.
That way, since if you're using it and students know, well, I'm gonna take this section that uses this, I can save $100 and take this section, knowing for a fact that you're gonna use an open education resource.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would get pushed through, but it's just an idea.
Yeah.
Many universities I've heard of in the open textbook network have something like that, so it's
Yeah.
possible.
Because I mean, I know there's the designation for online courses, which is separate, but then maybe there could be like an OER symbol or something like that, if the instructors are committed to using that resource. And then, the second thing was, when you mentioned the commons, that's OER commons. That's different than the Canvas commons. So I just wanted to separate that so that people don't get confused. When you're in Canvas, it's the Canvas commons, which is resources that instructors share, which
Oh,
is free and
commons.
open to use, but it's separate from the OER commons.org. So, just if anybody had any questions on that. Hang on, he's back. Verification.
Is there any work, or I'm sure people on campus are sharing some of their resources? So if we have stuff, or if anybody has stuff that they want to actually share, maybe not a whole textbook, but videos and stuff, what's the best, what's the way you do that?
From advice, when people ask me, that would be different from what OIT might say, but I would say it would depend a lot on what you want, who your audience is and what you want done with it. So, for example, if you just want to share with the class, maybe.
I mean, share with other, give back to the
Yeah.
open resource movement and share back for other universities
Oh, that's
or
great. That's great.
others. So what, what are the mechanisms and what should you be sort of aware of and how do you go about doing some of that?
I can speak just from the OIT campus side, is that the commons is the area to do that. So you would have PDFs, images, audio, video clips, your PowerPoint slides. You can create full-blown assignments or full-blown learning modules, and then share the entire learning module out to the commons. And everybody, or anyone who is a Canvas user, has access to the Canvas commons. So you can be in Australia and use a resource from you here at the University of Tennessee, as long as you give available now to everybody, and it's actually split between Canvas Commons Public, which is everybody using Canvas, and then there's a separate non-public one, which is just people at UTK sharing their own resources. So there's like a separate sub-user for Commons, I guess.
And when you mention putting the appropriate words or whatever as far as how it can be used, what are some guidelines for
You
for
want
that?
to get to know the Creative Commons. All these you want to get to know the Creative Commons, which is a group of attorneys and law professors who have created 6 building blocks for open licenses, and you can mix those building blocks to get different sort of flavors of a license. And so, actually, do you mind if I just pop up here and
that'd be
show?
great.
Thank you. So, let's just go right up here. CreativeCommons.org, it's been around for a long while, and it's not going away. They're on their 4th iteration of licenses, so usually just adding some more details to those. But it's a nonprofit organization, and what you do is you click on Share Your Work, and you get to decide by choosing this, you sort of walk through and you see what you want to be free, what you don't want to be free, and then it gives you your ideal license. I'll show you under licensing types. These are symbols and then what the symbol means, and then usually how we call it in shorthand. So the most open license is simply an attribution only. You just want credit that you created this, and anyone can use it, anyone can build on it, they can link back to your original. That's attribution only. Then we have, Share likes a little complicated, let's go on to non-commercial. Non-commercial means it's, oh, sorry, thank you. Okay, so a non-commercial license here means you're okay with any use as long as it's for a non-profit, non-commercial use. For example, anybody in an institution of higher ed that's not a for-profit college could use your materials if you licensed it as attribution non-commercial. So that would mean that if a large publisher says, hey, that's really great, and we want to include it in our textbook, that is a commercial use, and so they'd have to go, that's the reason attribution is on every single license. You can go back to the original creator and say, hey, I'd like your work, and I'd like to add it in. Can we talk about that? So that you would be able to make some money from that use if you wanted to. No derivatives means you can't change it, you shouldn't build on it, it's just, nobody can modify it without your permission. Share alike means the people in the future have to use the same license in order to use it. So that protects sort of the long sort of downstream, making it whatever you wanted, whether it's attribution only or attribution non-commercial or whatever mix. So you can put these together. And so typically what you'll see on a website or on an educational material is something that looks like this. And this right here tells you it's not, copyright exists, copyright is still there. A license sits on top of copyright and either makes it more restrictive or less restrictive. In this case, for example, if you're using software from Windows, that shrink wrap license, that sort of thing, that as soon as you start using it, it's a much reduced license. You have many more restrictions than just under copyright. Under Creative Commons, it's a much more open license. And so you're saying, I have copyright, but as the copyright holder, it's in my power to tell you what you can do with it. And in this case, it's saying, all I want is credit. You can use anything, which means I can go in, take any of this, put it on our own website, and say, this information came from the Creative Commons. So if we go into this book that Adam had up, it's very small, but this right here is, this license is the sort of, it's machine readable,
which is good. So the licenses come in 3 versions of each license: human readable, lawyer readable, and machine readable. So right here is Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike, and the latest 4.0 version of that license. And what that means is here. I can share and adapt as long as these are met. I give credit to the original creator, I use it for a non-commercial purpose, and I license it with this same license so that other people can build on it if they want to. Okay? And so that's, you know, the human readable. You can see the legal readable here, which is what all the lawyers want to see. And the machine readable means that OER Commons and Canvas Commons and others know that this is a Creative Commons license and can find it. I'll also add on to, you know, if you want the absolute broadest audience for the work that you're doing, Canvas Commons is great. It's also only for people using Canvas. So if you're interested in something wider, you might try the oercommons.org, which is where a lot of people internationally are looking for these. And you could even put it in both places because you are the copyright holder and you're saying this is the license and I'm going to allow other people to use it. That means I can put it in lots of different places. So that's one option as well. And then if you have something different that maybe doesn't fit these, you know, you can also work with things in that everyone has IT server space, right? So maybe you want to have some things on your website and you might want to link to that from things that you have in OER Commons or in Canvas Commons. If you want something that's maybe preserved long-term, like a text, maybe you want to put that in the university's open repository, Trace, which provides a more permanence for some of these materials. You've got lots of options, and I think we can all work together to get you what you need. So, sorry, I didn't need to.
The Creative Commons site has a great search engine.
Yes.
You can search for photos, you can search for videos, you can all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it's a great find things.
Mhm. Let me take that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good comment. You need to make sure that if you're incorporating somebody else's work, that they either have a Creative Commons license that allows you to use it, and I still always recommend people to still seek permission, just so that individual also knows it. And it's always a good, I think it's always good for you to always make sure that you credit that individual. A lot of people tend not to do that, but one, it's 3 ways of covering yourself to make sure that you've clicked on every dot to make sure that when you're submitting something out to other people, you know, just, I always say, you know, do unto others as you would have others do to you. And it's just, it's a great way if you really want to do sharing.
One of the things I'm doing with OIT is working on accessibility, so I want to put in a quick plug for this. Is if you do make things available or whatever through that, the Diagram Center is a great resource, especially for like technical things, because what they've got, it actually originated out of originally open source materials that people were submitting, and they had to come up with, well, how do we make these accessible? So they actually have like a pretty, decent set of guidelines for how you would describe images and diagrams and charts and stuff like that. So again, if you're thinking about putting it out on the open web, more and more accessibility is an issue. And if you can build that in on the front end, it makes it a lot easier on the back end, to just put a brief image description. They go through a lot of different, different, things to think about or whatever. So, and again, it usually helps people who use screen readers and things like that, but it can also be helpful to any student who might want a description of what they're actually looking at.
Search engines to know
Yeah.
to find pictures.
Right, yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to put in a plug for accessibility as a part of this too. And the great thing about, I know textbooks are more and more automatically accessible, and publishers are taking that very seriously. But a lot of these, because they exist in native electronic formats, are automatically more accessible in a lot of ways than some of the proprietary. The more bells and whistles you have on a textbook, the more likely it is it's harder to make accessible, frankly. So, anyway.
I have one other, maybe quick question. Is there any limitation on what we can share if we've created it under, as an employee of UT?
If there are, my understanding of this is faculty and graduate students who are teaching own the rights to their work.
And the same thing with, thank you. So faculty own the rights to the work that they use in teaching. They also own the rights to the work that they publish, the research that they do. Now there are some unique things when it might be considered a work made for hire. Those are sometimes when you have a grant, and there are certain stipulations that you might not own the rights to your work then. If it's an invention or some material objects that you're creating, that falls under an entirely different category.
I was thinking more just class materials
Yeah.
that we develop is we're free to share pretty much however we want to share.
There is I can point you to it, there's a policy, it's the sort of copyright and permissions policy at UT, but in general, if you're doing this as part of your job, it could be, at some places it might be considered a work made for hire. At UT it is yours, and unless, like I said, there's something unique out there or something a little bit different.
Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, if you were to license something as non-commercial and then put it out there as attribution, non-commercial, not doing the share line, and someone came along and used it for a non-commercial purpose, but did not put a non-commercial license on it as you had, then could someone come along and use it for commercial purposes later on?
Yes.
So that's a good reason for using the share
Share
alike
alike.
always.
Yes.
Now, the non-derivative, being the most restrictive of everything, I rarely use that, but I must say that if I were to take a photo and I didn't want somebody changing the faces on the photo
Sure.
and creating a problem or whatever,
Sure.
I might use that non-derivative license.
Right. It is important to think about, as you just said, I think, thinking about the particular context. So you might have a photo that you license that way, but you might not want the entire material licensed non-derivative. So you can also, within each, a photograph is considered its own copyrightable item, and that means it can have its own license within. It's also, of course, important to remember that we still have fair use. So if someone wanted to, for parody purposes or something, that's considered fair use, and that goes into a whole other legal area. But if you don't want it changed, absolutely, that's within your power within Creative Commons to say, don't make any adaptations without my permission. And then within the legal framework, there are, little safety valves for what people want to do with free speech and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
And also remind them that they can also put copyright on it.
Yeah.
I mean, when copyright,
That's
once
right.
once you create something, you have copyright.
That's right.
And you can put copyright notice on it. Here's another thing. If you're taking pictures of someone else and you're including that in something, I really hope you have their permission to use their image to be inclusive in any kind of print material. Because their image is their own. And so, and especially if you're dealing with students or any of those situations, so you need to make sure when you're putting something out to the world, it's one thing to be in a classroom, but when you're sharing with others, you want to make sure that you are thoughtful about how you're doing those things.
I'll also mention briefly, and this is actually partly from some conversations I've had with authors and creators, is if you're concerned, if you created something and it's very important to you to make sure that nobody is profiting from it or not following your license, let's get back into copyright. If you have material that could be valuable for someone else to recreate or to use, and you don't want to openly license it that way, if it's for commercial purposes or something. Basically, if you have any recourse, legal recourse in the future, if you're concerned and you would want to take somebody to court and sue for not following the license or for violating your copyright, you definitely want to register your copyright still. Adding on, like I said, the Creative Commons license doesn't take away copyright. You still have that. And so if you don't have a registration in the Copyright Office, your ability to bring a case is much more difficult. You might not get as many, you might not also get as much money back, depending on what we're talking about, but I don't in any way want to say Creative Commons is instead of, it works in conjunction with copyright. So just a little plug there for that, being aware of that too.
Well, we're at 1:20, so we're actually over time. But you know, feel free to hang around for a little bit longer and talk and ask questions. And thank you all for coming. I thought this was a great session. Thank you all for